The new movie Transformers 1 has released in theaters, and in today's video, I am going to be giving a commentary explaining why the movie is something that Hollywood needs to learn from. There is something about it that most IPs and franchises need to take into consideration when making future films or television shows. Welcome to my channel, Film Obsessed, where I talk about everything that I love in the world of movies and television. With today's video discussing the new movie Transformers 1, this is a franchise that has been going for a long time now through a slew of movies and television shows, both live action and animated. A franchise steeped in some of the highest numbers of sales for toys, and the films themselves racking in some impressive box office numbers. Transformers 1 is just the newest iteration to be added to this list of accolades and projects that have come out, but there is something that this movie specifically does that takes the franchise in a direction that Hollywood needs to learn from with regards to how other franchises need to be making films or television shows. That something is what we like to call formula, and going back to the roots of what made the franchise as popular as it is to this day. The Transformers franchise is one of the all-time greats when it comes to fundamentally misunderstanding what it is that makes itself so popular. When you take a look at the most prudent examples of this with regards to the Michael Bay films, it showed just how out of touch the brand was when giving the fans what they like to see. Michael Bay's ability to completely go in the opposite direction of what makes Transformers awesome is why people fell off so hard from even caring about the franchise as a whole. Don't get me wrong, if there is one thing that he did get right, is that he made it entertaining from an action perspective for the most part. However, everything else about his films was utter garbage. Everything from really terrible jokes and innuendos, following the human characters who you don't care about, like Shia LaBeouf's character or Mark Wahlberg's in the last two films he made, and then finally, the biggest issue of them all, which was not following the Transformers themselves enough. So what did Transformers 1 do right? Well, it threw out all that stuff from the past out the window. For one, not only is the movie taking itself back to the animated roots of when it originally started, but it is also following the formula that it was brought up upon by actually making it a story about the Transformers themselves without the inclusion of other unnecessary things like humans, for example. Now, originally, the reception this movie was getting when it was first shown was not very positive because of the more animated, kid-friendly nature of it all. People did not receive that first trailer well because of that reason. But then the first reviews started coming up from the critics, and then when the movie released, people started to see just how much fun it was. A film filled with a lot more heart and character development than some would have thought, along with the action sequences that mimic a lot of the awesome parts of what made people fall in love with the franchise. And guess what? There's not a single human being in sight in this film. Now, admittedly, I want to make this perfectly clear. I am somebody who is a bit different on some of the other Transformers films that have included humans. I actually do enjoy the first Michael Bay film. I think it is an underrated movie that, yes, has a lot of bad in it, but it was also a lot of fun. It is easily the most rewatchable of them all for me by a mile. Revenge of the Fallen was honestly an unmitigated pile of shit. I think this is honestly going to go down as one of the worst films of all time from a big IP franchise. Dark of the Moon I actually have a soft spot for, at least with regards to the last third act, when it takes place in Chicago and we get all that amazing action. To this day, I've always said that that is where Michael Bay's movies should have ended. I mean, for God's sakes, man, Megatron literally gets his head ripped off at the end of the film in one of the most violent deaths I've ever seen on screen. The two Mark Wahlberg movies that came after were just so unnecessary to the point where you'd probably get an idea as to how I feel about those ones. Bumblebee came after those movies, and again, while featuring humans, it actually was probably the better film of all the rest that came before it. There was heart to that film, there was good character development in it, and so most people were hoping that that would be a good step up to continue it in live action. Sadly though, the next film that came out with Transformers Rise of the Beasts did not do well enough to sustain people's interest, even if somebody like me, for example, did think that it was just okay. But again, there is that factor included with all these films that has brought it down for a lot of people, which is the humans. When you look back at so many franchises that have incorporated humans into their adaptations, you'll find that a lot of them have really missed the point of what makes the IP appealing. It is this formula that certain brands have brought forward that when you mess around with it, it turns it into a completely different kind of film. Some other classic science fiction properties have suffered from this lack of their formula in the past that are egregious examples of it, just like with Transformers. Franchises like the Alien films, Predator, or even the Terminator movies. Alien for a while moved away from the horror-like nature that made the original films iconic, and it basically turned into an action film filled with CGI xenomorphs and not giving you the more enclosed and suffocating suspense and tension that, again, the original film was about. The Predator movies were kind of all over the place, and more so just used for their name as a way to cash grab, although were less egregious than the other two franchises because at least a few of the Predator sequels and spin-offs were fun in their own way. Terminator is a franchise that just went completely off the rails away from its formula. Like Alien, it started more as a horror film mixed with action elements, and then subsequent sequels that came after it started losing themselves within the whole point of the actual end of the world, and then the post-apocalyptic Earth that was taken over by the Terminators after. They kept trying too hard to go into the plot lines of time travel, and how John Connor was a big deal in all of it. Story-wise, they just kept making less sense as they went on, essentially, and so that is what lost people. Recently, we've actually seen these franchises start to make a little bit of a comeback with films like Prey, Alien Romulus, and then even the Terminator Zero series on Netflix. So again, to tie this back into Transformers, you are seeing that this franchise is starting to bring itself back to the original formula while also keeping itself in the roots of the animated nature that it started as. As of me recording this video, the movie only has made $25 million domestically on its opening weekend, which is actually a lot lower than I thought it would be. I think that this could also be a way to show that maybe people were just not as confident in another Transformers movie because they thought that it would just be like all the rest that came before. At least from the way people are talking about it right now, that seems to not be the case, so I'm hoping that it gets good word of mouth and can make a good chunk of money by the time that it ends its theatrical run. So what did we learn today? I think we learned that examples like Transformers 1 are to show that Hollywood needs to realize that throughout their history, you can learn from the mistakes of the past and actually make sure that the franchises you are making films and televisions out of can follow a formula that works for them and that people like to see. This kind of attitude that studios imposed on a lot of films has been happening since even before the 2000s. Horror franchises, for example, have certainly seen enough of that, with how many IPs back in the day in the 70s and 80s were just riddled with countless sequels that moved away from the formula of what made the original memorable. Video game adaptations started coming into the light in the 90s, but again, were not given the proper respect. And then even with Transformers films under Michael Bay, you see a lack of respect even there because he thought that it would be better to make quippy innuendo jokes every other 5 minutes, along with showing off Victoria's Secret models walking down the road next to a nice looking car. I know some people out there might like that kind of thing, but it's just not what Transformers is. The Michael Bay Transformers movies have been memed enough to this day, and while it is fun to look back on that stuff, I think those movies can give a good example to show that something like Transformers 1 is how you take a franchise and make sure that it is done correctly. So there you have it, my commentary of the new movie Transformers 1 and the good lessons that it can bring for Hollywood to learn from. This was not a commentary on the quality of Transformers 1, but just for how important of a movie that it is. Leave your comments down below on what you think about my commentary with regards to the movie and all the details I brought forward. Thank you all for stopping by my channel, Film Obsessed. If you want to see more moving forward for me on the channel with regards to film and television, and you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and also subscribe if you are new here and turn on that notification bell. That's a wrap, folks. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you all soon for the next video.